Hello, welcome. Is everybody in?
Yeah.
Everybody around? Yes, here we are. Yes, we're going to start the meeting in half a minute when people have all arrived. My name's Norman Thomas. I'm chairing proceedings for tonight.
Is everything all right, Norman?
Yes, yeah, okay.
Yeah, am I supposed to be unmuted?
For you.
Yeah, okay.
Hello, welcome everybody. My name's Norman Thomas. I'm the suspended chair of South Thanet Local Labour Party. Like numbers of other party officers, I've been purged, suspended in December of last year for daring to allow my local party to pass a motion calling for the restoration of the whip to Jeremy Corbyn. Tonight we have a briefing session on the purge in the Labour Party, and it's brought to you by the Labour in Exile network. We're a network of all who have been unfairly suspended, expelled, or otherwise forced out of the party, and of course, of those members who are staying to fight. All those people are welcome to join our network if they want to keep the Labour Party a democratic party. What unites us is a belief that the party needs to change, that we need to bring democracy and justice to the party. And we must take action to bring those changes now. It's absolutely critical at this time when the left is probably more under attack than it has been since the days of the Cold War in the 1950s, the purge in the Labour Party being a major factor in that attack on the left. How we do that will be the subject of our founding conference, which is next Saturday. On 27th of February. You can register for that if you want to go to that on Facebook or our webpage, and we look forward to seeing you there. Today, we want to brief you on the purge in the Labour Party. Our first speaker will be Neil Todd. He'll provide some historical context and talk about the first purges, which began in 2014, coinciding, funnily enough, with the coming of Jeremy Corbyn. Our second speaker, Esther Giles, will talk about the more recent officer purges and the role of the party's unendorsed General Secretary, David Evans. Neil and Esther will each speak for no more than 20 minutes, and we will then answer any questions you may have, or we'll attempt to answer them, and discuss what we're going to do, because that's the thing to hold on to. If we stick together, we can change things. We're not going away. We're not starting a party or a party within a party. This party, the Labour Party, is our party. We are still many. They are still few. For our first speaker, Neil Todd is an academic and teacher and one of the founding members of Labour in Exile. He's chair of our Witch Hunt Action Group, which has produced the questionnaire which we are launching today. Over to you, Neil.
Okay, thanks very much, Norman. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, okay, excellent. Okay, well, first of all, I welcome everybody. I should say that I'm actually calling you from Australia. Thanks to COVID, I am marooned in the penal colony of New South Wales. So please forgive me if I'm a little bit bleary and not quite so coherent. So what I want to talk to you about today in my slot is three things, really. First of all, to give you the origin of the witch hunt. How did it evolve? Secondly, to talk about the main agents behind the witch hunt. And thirdly, looking at some statistics behind it. But before I do that, I just want to say a little bit about my own background and my own view of this situation, given that my father was in Palestine police under the British mandate. So first of all, about myself, I became active during the miners' strike in the 1980s, being the son of a Scots miner, and joined the Labour Party about that time. I'm actually one of the very few people who have been victims of both the Kinnock witch hunt and the present one. But like many others, I rejoined the Labour Party in 2015 and became active once again. However, after opposing resolutions opposing the IHRA bogus definition and in support of Mark Wadsworth, I myself became a victim of the witch hunt. Like many other victims, I'm a lifelong anti-racist and anti-fascist. As an anti-racist and anti-fascist, I'm also an anti-Zionist. Now, some of you may never have heard of that term. I suspect some of you have, some of you haven't. But just to get a few things clear, it's important that we distinguish between Zionism, which is a political ideology, Judaism, which is a religion, and Israel, which is a state. So, for example, Zionism, majority of Zionists are actually not Jewish. They're mostly Christian Zionists, such as Donald Trump. Conversely, many Jews are not Zionists, such as the Haredi Jews or socialist anti-Zionists. So let's get that point. But let me just go back to my own personal angle on this. My own position is very much informed by the fact that, having escaped the horrors of the Scottish shale industry, my father served in Palestine at the end of the British Mandate. And here you can see a copy of his service record. After training in Jenin in 1947, he was posted to Jerusalem in June 47, and he was there for about 9 months until the 30th of March, when he was transferred to Haifa. Now, this was just a few days before the horrific massacre of days seen in the southern suburbs of Jerusalem, carried out on the 9th of April by the extreme far-right Zionist terror groups, the Irgun and Lehi, led by Menachem Begin. Now, this was a horrific massacre. Hundreds of men, women, and children were butchered. It was just one of many carried out in the name of Zionism. And it was one of many. It became symbolic of the reality behind the foundation of Israel, and it caused outrage around the world, including from many prominent Jewish refugees. Albert Einstein, one of my heroes as a young physics student in 1980, said of this in a letter shortly after that incident: "It is inconceivable that those who oppose fascism throughout the world, if correctly informed as to Mr. Begin's political record and perspectives, could add their names and support to the movement he represents." Now, Einstein's identification of Zionism as just another kind of fascism would absurdly, in today's Labour Party, have him expelled for anti-Semitism. Let me just return to the story of my father for the next slide. After Jerusalem, he was then posted to Haifa, where he volunteered for the Haifa Volunteer Force, which was a rear guard. The previous slide, that's it. Where my father was a witness to the ethnic cleanse of Haifa from April the 21st, when all British forces in Haifa were ordered to remain inside the port area after a deal was made with the British Army. And from the confines of their billets in trade school, frustrated British priests could see the fighting, hear the noise of mortars, machine guns, bombs, say nothing of screams of the wounded and dying. Haganah troops were shooting anyone that they found in the open. And many police actually acted against orders to rescue frightened women and children attempting to escape, and in doing so lost their own lives. Now, because of this deal between the British Army and Haganah, nearly 50% of the British section of the rear guard resigned. My father was one of the very few who stayed on. By the time the British left in June 1948, there was just literally 2,000 Christians and 1,300 Muslims out of an original 64,000 who lived in the city. Many ex-British policemen, who, especially those who served in Haifa, felt very strongly for the rest of their lives that the British Army had betrayed the Arabs. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? Okay, this, you can see an image from my father's passport. You see he entered Gaza on the 6th of April 1947, and then exited from Haifa on the 23rd of September 1948. His entry visa was issued by the government of Palestine, and his exit visa was issued by the state of Israel. Now, it turns out that he was actually there for an extra 3 months after the British pulled out. He left in September. Now, what he was doing there, I don't know. It probably will never find out. But I think it's very lucky that he got out, and I'm of course very pleased that he did, because I'm still here. But as you can imagine, these events left a lasting impression on many former officers, and my father was no different. He had a lifelong hatred for Menachem Begin, the leader of Irgun, later to become Likud, while those Zionist ethnic cleansers became members of the Israeli Defense Force. Now, I never really talked about Palestine with my father, but I can still hear the visceral disgust that he expressed when the Zionist fascist Begin became prime minister in the 1970s. Today's far-right government of Likud leader Benjamin Netanyahu is just a continuation of the fascism which established the state of Israel. So, next slide, please. So, let's go then straight into from the 48 to 1970 to 2014. Now, a lot of people think that the current witch hunt actually started after Jeremy Corbyn got elected, but the reality is that the process actually started well before that. In 2014, there was a particularly unpleasant further episode with the Gaza War of 2014. Another horrific atrocity carried out by the state of Israel. Many thousands of Palestinians lost their lives and so on. And rightfully, these war crimes caused outrage and condemnation around the world. And because of the bad publicity that it was causing, the so-called campaign against anti-Semitism was formed to counter Palestinian rights campaigners with, you guessed it, smears of anti-Semitism. So already there was considerable hostility from, for example, the Board of Deputies to the Labour Party. And so including Ed Miliband, who himself is Jewish, when he expressed support for the Palestinians. So you can already see then that this falsifies the narrative that we've heard that it was somehow a problem with Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. And what it shows is the essential point of friction is that of Israel-Palestine, irrespective of who is leader. It's clear that the hostility of Israel to the possibility of a Labour government, a socialist Labour government with an ethical foreign policy, is central to the whole thing. So, as you know, Ed Miliband lost he lost the election. Jeremy Corbyn was elected. Shortly after Corbyn was elected, we then get the formation of the so-called Jewish Labour movement. In reality, the Zionist anti-Labour movement, because it's linked to the World Zionist Organization, and its sole purpose was to see the defeat of the Corbyn movement. We know that from records of their meetings. So, of course, then then after that, of course, the smears got ramped up. And we had the case of the Oxford Students' Union with a smear from BICOM, another Israel lobby group. And around that time, we started having the suspensions. Tony Greenstein, who was Jewish, son of a rabbi. Naz Shah, for sharing a post by Norman Finkelstein, who was Jewish, with the absurd implication that somehow Norman Finkelstein is an anti-Semite. Then, of course, we had the others, Ken Livingstone, Jackie Walker, and others. Then, of course, around about the time, yet another Israel lobby group, the so-called Labour Against Anti-Semitism, was formed. So you've got three of these groups that previously didn't exist are now being formed at this point. Then, of course, we had the case of Mark Wadsworth with the Chakrabarti report. And then, of course, we had the chicken coup led by yet another Israel lobby group, the Labour Friends of Israel. Now, so around this time, we had essentially the manufacture of the so-called anti-Semitism crisis. And this created this kind of hysteria within an atmosphere of moral panic. But then it was revealed around that time, at the beginning of 2017, an Al Jazeera documentary. You all remember that one? Where it was revealed that the Israeli spy, Shir Massot, was actively involved in all these groups, caught on camera handing over £1 million to the LFI, and was caught on camera actively talking about taking down politicians, including Tory politicians. But despite all these jeers and smears, Labour came very close to winning in 2017. And because we now know that it would have won if it hadn't been for the sabotage at the by insiders inside the bureaucracy. So then we move on then to 2018 when Jenny Formey comes in. And here we see the witch hunt ramps up again. We start seeing the expulsions. We have Tony Greenstein, Mark Wadsworth. Who can forget that disgusting parade of 40 white MPs coming to lynch Mark? And then, of course, we also had Ken Livingstone resigns and so on. And unfortunately, around that time, the party capitulated on the so-called IHRA definition. We also, around that time, shortly after, Jackie Walker was expelled, and then we had the situation with Chris Williamson, who was suspended then resuspended. So look at this case. We look at all these people that at that stage, got 2 of them are Jewish, 2 of them are black, all of them lifelong anti-racists and anti-fascists. And that again just shows the lie of the fact that this is somehow about anti-Semitism. It's nothing to do with anti-Semitism. So then, of course, we had the complaint to the EHRC by these 2 lobby groups that were formed specifically to attack Corbyn. Then another incident, bad news for Labour. This was a remarkable academic study trying to uncover the reality behind the so-called anti-Semitism crisis by some very well-known academics and scholars, including David Miller. Extraordinarily, this book had to be, the launch had to be called off because of threats of bombing, and it's extraordinary, isn't it? Bombing threats, book burning. It's not something you'd expect in a democratic state. Then, of course, after that, Labour lost the 2019 general election, and then we get into the last phase of the witch hunt with the election of Keir Starmer and the appointment of Evans. One other thing I should say, an important thing that happened at the end of 2019 was the change to the party conference, the party Labour rule book, which allowed so-called fast track cases to be done. I'll come back to that later. We'll see the implications of that. So I think, yeah, I mean, then of course we've seen the ramp up, which Esther is going to be talking about, and then of course most recently we had yet another Israeli spy coming to join the Labour Party, Asaf Kaplan. Okay, so I think I'll move on to the next slide, please. So here what I've tried to do is just talk about the main agents behind the witch hunt. So I see this from a kind of quasi-judicial perspective. So you've got the complainants, the investigators, the adjudicators, the defendants. We've already met some of the key instigators, the main Israel lobby groups, these groups which spend their time trawling social media. And we know, of course, that the Israeli Strategic Affairs Ministry is involved. We've got Shia Massot, we've got Asaf Kaplan. We've got the CAA manufacturing anti-Semitism smears on an industrial scale. These get sent up to the secretive GLU, which investigates and then comes up with so-called charges, which they send on to the NEC. Because we also know that they systematically leak these documents to the gutter press, so that the smears continue in another way through the gutter journalists such as Lee Harbin. Then, of course, we now have the NEC, which is, of course, controlled by the right. So we got the likes of Luke Akers. So you can see at every level, at the leadership level, Keir Starmer and his assistant Asaf Kaplan, General Secretary, the NEC, all of these things are basically stacked against the individual defendants, the socialists, anti-racist and Palestinian campaigners, who are the victims of this massive witch hunt. Then finally, we have the recent advisory board, which is made up of yet the same, actually the complainants. You can see from a natural justice point of view, it is completely outrageous. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next, to the last part of the talk. I'm sorry, I've gone very quickly. So I'm just going to talk about some numbers. Now, what we know, now, as I said, it's clear that since 2018, the numbers have been going up. What this shows is a cumulative case numbers since these case numbers are introduced. What you can see is a massive acceleration in the number of cases. There's presently about 6,000 people who are currently going through the system. So you can see that there is a massive backlog of cases that are being dealt with. I'm going to go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so what this is showing is the annualized number of members who've been affected. And what you can see from here is that there was a massive acceleration in 2019 when Formby came in to double the number of NEC cases from about 400 to about 800 a year. The number of administrative suspensions also tripled from 100 to 300. And the same so with the number of NEC disputes panels. But also, if you look at the last part of that graph, you can see that the number of referrals to the NCC has actually gone down. And that's as a result of the fast track procedures. The NCC has been cut out completely from the process, almost completely. We were told that this fast track process was only supposed to be for the most egregious cases. The reality is now that the right have control of it. They're using all of the cases that are being used in this way. So can I have the next slide, please? So what you can see here, this is the number of monthly NEC cases, a number of, this is an approximate monthly rate. So you see that the number of cases of the NEC disputes panels has rocketed up, and so has the number of expulsions. And what this means is that the people on these panels are literally taking no more than 15, 20 minutes to expel individuals. It's extraordinary, isn't it? You've been accused of this outrageous charge, and these people are expelling you in 15 to 20 minutes. And I'll take the last slide, actually. Thank you. So again, I think this really sums it up. This is the total annual expulsions, and you can see the way in which it has gone up. And you see in 2018, all of the expulsions were done through the NCC. The NCC was actually created in 1986 that was when I got witch hunted. We were actually successful in getting a High Court injunction to block our expulsion, and it was a result of our case and others of that year that actually led to the formation of the NCC. The whole point of the NCC was that it was to give a semblance of natural justice, and in reality it was of course a kangaroo court, but it was the Labour Party genuflecting to natural justice. Now they're not even pretending to genuflect towards natural justice. You will see that in 2019 the number of cases dealt by NCC expulsions has overtook the number of NCC cases, and now in 2020 it's completely bypassed the NCC. So this process, I'm going to finish very shortly, it has more of the character of an abattoir than a natural justice process. It's just outrageous, and it's almost certainly unlawful. And it's certainly one of the things that we're looking into in our group. So I think I went through that very quickly. You know, it's a lot going on. I hope that at least you've got some of the idea of what's happening. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you all very much for listening, and I'm going to pass on to our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. That's the big thing that I think comes across to me from listening to you is the huge scale of this operation that's going on. Who would have thought that there would be such a vast operation just to suspend and expel people from the Labour Party? This is staggering. I mean, it's amazing that the party has got enough members, of course, to need such an operation, but the idea that they're actually doing it is even more appalling. But thanks very much for that, Neil. And now we'll go over to Esther Giles, who's a suspended secretary of the CLP. And Esther, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. As Norman says, I'm a suspended CLP secretary. I was suspended on the 23rd of November, and I'll put that date into the context of the next phase, which is the officer purges phase, which started on the 29th of October 2020. I expect you'll recognise that date. That is the date that the EHRC report was published and press announced by Keir Starmer. And I think other pieces of context to remember as we go through what I'm going to say in the next few minutes is the quotation from Sir Keir, which is that he is a Zionist without qualification. and also Angela Rayner, who late on in November said, if I have to suspend thousands and thousands of members, if I have to suspend thousands and thousands of members, we will do so. So following the release of the EHRC report on the 29th of October, the General Secretary issued to CLP secretaries and chairs, and sometimes to branch secretaries, 4 diktats, the first of which was on the 29th of October at 11:24 a.m. And in the first diktat, David Evans advised that there would be no discussion on social media of the contents of the EHRC report. So at that point, people were allowed to discuss it, but it wasn't allowed to be represented on social media. And that if people did want to discuss it on social media, then they should be suspended from access from the relevant social media accounts. And in this first diktat, he said that we needed to change the culture, reflecting what Keir Starmer had said in his speech and his press release on the 29th of October. So at this point, CLP secretaries and chairs started to be concerned, but nobody thought about suspensions at this point. So time went on, and on the 5th of November, the General Secretary issued a further diktat, which used the term not competent business. So some of you might recognise this term. It is used by Jenny Formby when she said it was not competent business to discuss any suspensions because it might prejudice the outcome of the hearing and so forth. In Jenny's time, not competent business was just understood to mean we won't take any notice of you if you issue any motions or if you have any discussions. That the term no competent business had no standing in the rule book and no standing in law, but David Evans began to use the term in rather a different way, and we didn't know this at the time, but he did say that if people actually transgressed against what he termed not competent business, which was discussing and passing motions regarding Jeremy Corbyn or questioning or challenging the HRC report, the party will take appropriate action. So it began to sound quite sinister at this point. At the beginning of November, in the first couple of weeks of November, the first officer suspension started to take place. And of course, at first, we didn't quite believe that this was happening. It's never happened in the history of the Labour Party that officers were suspended for delivering what was in fact a requirement for them under the rule book to allow their members to engage in legitimate debate. And it had never been the case before that the General Secretary dictated what members should be allowed to discuss. So during the next couple of weeks in November, the suspensions continued, and by the end of November, we were getting up into the 50s and 60s of officers suspended. A further diktat came on the 26th of November, saying that expressions of solidarity were banned. Now, of course, during this period, CLPs were thinking, well, can we possibly discuss or pass motions that are consistent with the diktats? So people tried various ways of having discussions without breaking the guidelines, and a lot of motions were passed. Firstly, expressing a wish that Jeremy Corbyn should be reinstated, which of course was then banned, and then expressing a wish that Jeremy should have the whip restored, expressing solidarity with Jeremy Corbyn, votes of no confidence in the General Secretary, votes of no confidence in the leader. So all of these motions were being passed during November, and I'll go into the numbers in a moment. Finally, on the 8th of December, the final diktat came out that said that any motions about anything that David Evans had been talked about should be ruled out of order and not included in any meeting papers. So what was happening during this period is that the CLPs were trying to outguess what the next diktat was going to be, and then the diktats were following on to ban what CLPs were subsequently doing, so that by the end of November, hardly anything was permitted to be discussed related to any of these issues. And what the final letter said is that the fact that members feel unsafe should take precedence over people's rights to debate. So that's where we got to at the end of December. And the suspensions were continuing, and in the beginning of December, 284 CLPs and secretaries wrote to the General Secretary asking for an end to the officer purges and asking for the withdrawal of the so-called guidance and I'm calling diktats. But we've never had a reply from the General Secretary. On the 16th of December, the CLP secretaries arranged a meeting with the General Secretary, and David Evans was very flattering towards the CLP secretaries. He said that we were the backbone of the party. He admitted, however, that the situation was awkward, but said, as he had said in his letters, that people's right to free speech would have to be curtailed in the meantime until confidence had been restored. And he also said there can be no equivocation about this. So he's really, really clear that he's not going to rescind any of the diktats or the guidance. So I'm going to share my screen now so that you can see some of the numbers. So I talked about the fact that during November, increasing numbers of CLPs were discussing and passing motions that were dissenting from the guidance sent by the General Secretary about solidarity with Jeremy Corbyn, about votes no confidence with the leader, about restoring the whip to Jeremy Corbyn and so forth. Overall, records collected by Save Our Socialists and collected from various sources suggested that around 96 CRPs had passed or issued dissenting motions about all of these things. Interestingly, only 35 of those 96 CLPs had officers suspended. So there's something not at all consistent about this phase of the officer purges. And this chart shows how that inconsistency plays out across the different regions of the country. The blue bar in this chart shows the number of CLPs by region that passed or discussed dissenting motions. So you can see that London, for example, passed the most dissenting motions, followed by the Southwest. The orange bar shows the CLPs that had officers suspended where they passed dissenting motions. And what you can see here is that although London had the most dissenting motions, it in fact didn't have all that many. Only 6 CLPs actually had suspended officers, whereas in the Southwest, if you were a CLP in the Southwest that passed a dissenting motion, you had an 80% chance of having your officer suspended. The grey bars show the number of officers suspended. It's in the region of 70. And in the Southwest, the number of officers suspended was 20. So it makes up nearly 40% of the total number of suspensions. So there's the vast difference across the regions and the extent to which the diktats were enforced with suspensions. And you can see that in the north, in the West Midlands and in Scotland, there were no suspensions at all, despite the fact that motions were passed that dissented. So, of course, I was one of the officers, as you know, that was suspended. The first thing that you know about this is when you're a secretary, you organise the party's email system to contact members. So the weekend after we passed our motion, which was passed 56 to 19 in support of Jeremy Corbyn. I'll show you that motion a little bit later. You go into organise and you find you can't get in. So I'm thinking, well, is it a glitch in the system or have I actually been suspended? So it's a whole weekend of worrying about that. And then on the Monday, a letter lands in your email with important information regarding your membership and a letter saying that you've been administratively suspended. At this point, there's no indication at all as to what you've done wrong. Because apart from saying that you've breached the rules, the other important thing about the letter is that I was suspended by the General Secretary, who's taken on powers to carry out these administrative suspensions on the basis that they're urgent and immediate action needs to be taken to protect the party. I was suspended like many of the other officers. In fact, all of the officers I've talked to about the suspensions had been suspended under Rule 2.1.8. So what is Rule 2.1.8? It's about action which is prejudicial or grossly detrimental to the party. This is the rule that was used to suspend and then expel Mark Wadsworth. So it's being used carte blanche across all of the officer suspensions. A few weeks later, in fact, I should say that the party is very caring, because it does say if you're really stressed out by what's happened, and of course we all are, you can contact your GP or the Samaritans. What the suspension meant in my CLP is that the CLP ceased to function because both the secretary and the chair were suspended and nobody else had access to organise the email system. So we can't contact members and we can't organise meetings. So not only are the chair and the secretary suspended, the whole CLP is suspended and the regional office has taken over, although it's organised no meetings and no communications with members. So in January, I had the letter that detailed the allegations against me. So what's interesting about this is I was suspended because I circulated a motion. And that is the breach of the rule because I, along with many other secretaries and chairs, we've breached diktat, and therefore by circulating a motion, we have been suspended. And with the suspension information comes what I've called an interrogation here, a series of 19 questions to answer, many of which are asking people to self-incriminate. And again, the questions are very similar across all the officers that have been suspended, and include the question, do you regret what you did, circulating a motion, do you intend to do it again, and do you want to tell us anything else about this? So all of the officers suspended had to answer upward of a dozen questions, some up to two dozen questions, in order that the information could be passed to the NEC panel, which would read through the evidence. As Neil said, it all happens very quickly and decide whether further penalties should be imposed. Now, some officers have now been unsuspended. We think it's about a handful, but the unsuspensions, as far as we can see, come with very strict conditions around them. And in this unsuspension letter, you will see something which, again, has not been seen before, as far as I know, in the history of the Labour Party, because what it says is that the NEC has powers to issue guidance and instructions to what it calls subordinate party units. So the Labour Party is no longer a member-driven and a conference-driven organisation. It's driven by the NEC that actually can delegate as many of its powers as it likes to the General Secretary. So it's not conference that is in charge, it's not the membership that's in charge, it's the unendorsed General Secretary. And of course, these unsuspensions come with these conditions that if you break the rules again, then further penalties may follow. Lengthy period of suspension, you may be expelled, your case may go to the NCC. So where we are now with the officer suspensions is following this unprecedented attack, A, on democracy, and B, on the elected officers of CLPs. There's a trickle of officers being unsuspended, some with extremely rigorous conditions. We really don't know what is going to happen next. So over to Norman now with what we think we can do next. Norman, you're on mute.
I'll never get over that muting business. Yes, sorry about that. Yeah, thanks very much, Esther, and thanks for Neil before you as well. Yes, we've heard about the problem, and it's a very big problem. And now we're going to talk about what we can do about it. Have we got the slide for what we can do about it? Please, the last slide.
Yeah, coming up.
Oh. Here it comes. Okay, so the first thing we can do is something very important. At this conference, we're launching the questionnaire about the witch hunt, which Neil and the witch hunt group have produced. Now, that's gone live today. You can fill that in if you've been obviously suspended, because that will tell us much more about the witch hunt, allow us to collect information about it, and tell us more about what's actually going on. We need to have information so that we can help to oppose the witch hunt that's happening at the moment. So that's one thing you can do if you've been suspended. Another thing you can do is apply for a subject access request. That's under the data protection laws. You can find out, you've got a statutory right to find out what was done in your case. It may be a very difficult process getting it, but if you want to get that, you can apply for it. And if you want a model form for how to do that, then again, you can apply to us and we will send you a model of how to get your own subject access request. But you can find out some very valuable information by doing that. And it can be very revealing, as some of my colleagues have said. If you're still a functioning member in your CLP, you can pass model motions and we can supply them, model motions demanding change, demanding an end to what's going on. And that, is obviously something basically that we should demand, all members of the Labour Party should demand. If they feel that injustice is being done, then a motion is a way of opposing that. And whatever status you've got, you can sign the petitions. There are many petitions going around. We have a petition on our website, which is a notice of collective action as well. But you can sign that, but also we need to have more and more people just building up a general pressure for change, basically. So signing petitions is good. Come to the conference, our next Saturday, the Lean conference. It's our founding conference, and you can register for that on our website and on our Facebook page. But that's a very important thing to do. There's also a call for a recall conference, a demand for a recall conference, which is basically something that's provided for in the Labour Party constitution. If we meet certain requirements, we can have an emergency calling of the conference. And a number of unions are backing that, and other groups, and it obviously makes sense to back that. It's likely that that will be blocked officially, and then the pressure will be on to have a conference of the left or of all interested groups and parties who want to basically call a halt to the madness that's going on in the party at the moment. Another thing we can do is form democratic CLPs. So if democracy is being paralyzed in our existing CLPs, which in many it is, not all, but in many it is, that is, we're being penalized and punished if we talk about things that the General Secretary doesn't want us to talk about, and we find that we can't debate and discuss motions that we want to debate, then essentially we could still meet, members can still meet and basically have their own democratic groups. I think in some parts of the country, I know that's going on even as I speak. So those are the things that I think we've got listed on the page there. So we've covered that. What I would say is, come to the conference. That's a very important thing to do, to contribute your ideas. There are more ideas about what we can do, but overwhelmingly, it seems we need to take direct action. We can't wait for the next official Labour Party conference and just hope that we will be able to pass some motions or make some headway there. That's absolutely going to be blocked in a million different ways. We've got to take direct action now. And one of the motions that will be discussed at our conference is one that will say, we will only, in the coming elections, local elections and any other elections, I guess, this year, we will only support candidates who oppose the purge and who basically support the case for change in the party, to make the Labour Party a more democratic party, to have a disciplinary system based on the principles of natural justice instead of the crazy kangaroo courts that we're having at the moment. So we have to be serious about it. People have to join together and take the bit by the horns. No, not the bull by the horns. Yes, the bit by the horse. No. Anyway, but we've got to act. However we act, we've got to act. We've got to act quickly. But come to the conference. We're going to debate these things, and we're going to basically harness as many people as we can to change the party. and that's basically essentially what we're going to do. Now, the next part of the meeting is probably, the most important part of the meeting, which it could, because it's over to you to ask us questions and to make contributions. I'll be chairing the questions. Now, essentially, what I'm looking at giving people is 2 minutes, a chance to ask either a question or make a contribution. And my ambition will be to allow everybody who wants to speak. So I'll give priority to anyone who hasn't already spoken, if other people have already spoken. And please do sort of keep your comments in a comradely fashion and obey the usual rules of a good debate. Thank you. And let me see, I'll just call the first question we have is a David Warren, sorry. Yeah. David, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Norman. I won't take up too much time.
Okay.
Found the talk very, very interesting, and my best wishes go with all the people that are affected by this. I mean, Neil mentioned the witch hunts in the 1980s. I can remember that very well. Very active in the party in that period. But I spent a lot of my time as a trade union activist, and you mentioned the trade unions, Norman, I think in your comments just a minute ago. And I would say that the unions, particularly the ones that were sympathetic to Jeremy Corbyn, and that in my mind is at the moment is Unite and my old union, the CWU, Communication Workers Union, they're going to be fairly important in moving this issue forward. So my question is, what sort of support is coming from those unions or unions in general, and pressure to actually stop all this because it's just completely wrong and undemocratic.
Okay. All right. We'll take the questions, and we'll take, say, 3 questions, and before we come back and attempt to answer them. Okay. So could we go to Stephen Burgess now, please? Stephen Burgess.
Hello, can I be heard?
Yep.
Okay, so one of the central points in the presentation at the start was the fact that some of the warnings came with stern warnings that they'll go to the NCC. I want to highlight the fact, and it's important, and I can't imagine why people haven't already been made aware of this and why it wasn't mentioned in the discussion, that the NCC is actually being stifled. It's being stifled because it's run by very, very, very good people, most of them with a very pro-Corbyn stance. And it is, in fact, somewhere that every single suspended person and every single fast-track expelled person has an appeal to. You always have an appeal to the NCC. And what they are trying to do, I've been suspended for 2 years now on having been referred to the NCC. What they're trying to do is sideline and abolish the NCC. This is one of their weak points. We should be pressing very, very hard on it, because out of the NCC, there's something like 21 people on it, and about 19 of them are solid Corbynistas and solidly good people as well. And the chair is a solid good person as well. If you look at the squawk box to find out about who the NCC chair is, you'll find out it's someone from the Campaign for Labour Party Democracy. Now, what I'm saying here is that they are trying to avoid everybody going to the NCC and getting that appeal, because that appeal is your greatest chance ever of getting a fair trial inside the party. So we should be providing legal options to force the party to actually give these NCC appeals, which they're not doing. The NEC, of course, is completely run by the wrong kind of people and will send all sorts of terrible charges and all sorts of terrible staff to create all sorts of terrible, ridiculous charges against all sorts of people. So what we have to do is we have to legally force the party to give that NCC appeal. And if we don't legally force it, we only have ourselves to blame. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So Kevin Bean, please.
Thanks, Norman, and thanks to Neil and to Esther for their, the information and so on that they provided. I just want to sort of make a few comments about my own case, but just as an illustration. I'm now expelled from Wavertree constituency Labour Party in Liverpool, and like Esther, I was a constituency secretary. And 4 of us, who we rather mundanely call ourselves the Wavertree 4, were suspended in the spring of last year. and that included the chair and the secretary of the CLP, and then a couple of other officers as well. Now, I think what's important about our case is it has all the characteristics that Esther laid out in her case. Our case was that we made criticisms of our MPs, our current left MP, and I think this is the important point, Paula Barker, as a member of the campaign group. She went along with the Tom Watson narrative that Wavertree Labour Party had been anti-Semitic and bullying towards our previous MP, Luciana Berger, who went over to Change UK and now is working as a PR executive. And all we did was to write an article in our internally circulated news bulletin, criticizing this analysis and actually setting the facts straight. And for that, we were suspended along the similar lines to Esther. Now, why I go into some detail on this is that Esther's case, of course, turned around the suspension of Corbyn. And I'm concerned, I don't think any comrades here will put this forward, but I'm concerned that there is a bit of a tendency to think of this in terms of first and second waves. In other words, that people like Esther, Alan Gibbons, and so on, who passed or attempted to get motions passed in support of Jeremy Corbyn, that they're in some senses less of an issue than comrades like me, who were dubbed anti-Semitic. And I think we have to be very clear that all of the suspensions and all of the expulsions from that period are all one and the same. Particularly, I think this view is emerging because of the reinstatement of some comrades under very draconian conditions. So I think it's a question of a general principle that all of the expulsions and all of the suspensions are, should be questioned. They're
Absolutely.
Generally invalid, and they're very clearly an attack upon the left.
Absolutely, absolutely, Kevin. I think that's exactly our attitude, really. I mean, I agree that there's a trap that you can fall into in looking at these things, but it's for everybody, really, and anyone who's suffered an injustice should basically have that injustice reviewed and put right at the earliest opportunity. I'll take one more contribution from Christine Tang, and then we'll go back to our panelists for. Yeah, she actually shares my computer, so she's actually going to use it.
I'm in the same room as Norman. I am the expelled Secretary and Disability Officer of South Thanet. When Esther said that you get a note on your expulsion letter about contacting the Samaritans, you realise just how emotional this thing is. I mean, it's disgraceful that they think you're going to be so upset that you might go and kill yourself. And I did actually hear of a case of attempted suicide because someone had been disciplined by the party. So it's not a kind of vain bit of advice. The main point I wanted to make was that as the ex-disability officer, disabled people have been the main victims of this global pandemic. And I don't see the Labour Party speaking out and defending the people who suffered most from this. 120,000 people have got the disease and have suffered and have died. And that's just disgusting. And we should be speaking out about that. And I think we have to become the opposition and speak out where we don't see the Labour Party official people speaking out. That's all I have to say.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much, Christy. So, Esther and Neil, have you got any comments, answers for some of the questions that we've got, which include what support there might come from the unions, the role of the NCC, whether we've got hopes of that we should be concentrating on the NCC as our hopes, and also, I mean, the point that Kevin makes about being, not just concentrating on the first and second waves, that there are a lot of people who've been punished in this process, and obviously from Christine's making a point of view of us becoming the official opposition based on many people's feelings that the present Labour Party leadership isn't really fulfilling what proper opposition should be doing. Okay.
Do you want to go first, Neil, or shall I?
Yeah, I'll go first. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to take up the issue of the NCC because it's an issue which is dear to my own heart. As I mentioned, I was involved in the cases in the 1980s, which led to the formation of the NCC. In 1986, February 1986, some other comrades from Exeter were up for expulsion, and we managed to get a High Court injunction to block that. And there were actually that year, there were two other cases by the same firm. It was Christian Fisher, was a legal firm, and these three defeats to the party led to the formation of the NCC. The law, the common law on that was quite clear. The Labour Party, as an unincorporated association, was obliged to apply natural justice to its disciplinary procedures, and especially expulsions or punitive suspensions. The case law was very clear about that. There was a very famous case, Lewis versus Heffer, 1978, which was chaired by Lord Denning. So as a result, they formed the NCC. Now, the idea was that the NCC was supposed to be to give a fair hearing, because previously the party procedures were completely against natural justice. There were the judge, the jury, the policeman, and so on, all at the same time. So this new procedure was supposed there to give a semblance of natural justice. The reality was actually in the 1980s, it actually was a kangaroo court. Now, of course, it depends on who's on it. As you say, you mentioned that there's actually quite a lot of people on the left on it now. That doesn't necessarily guarantee you will get a fair review, but certainly it is actually the case now. What's happened is that the NEC has been signed. It's very clear from the statistics. So I actually agree. I think the Labour Party is now wide open to a new legal challenge. I believe these new suspensions are unlawful. And indeed, I've written to the firm of solicitors who dealt with our cases back in the 1980s with the hope we might get some of our case papers back. So I'm actually in active discussions with some firm solicitors on that. But in parallel with that, I should say actually another attack on this is to get the 2019 changes to the rulebook rescinded. We've actually got a model resolution which we'll be putting around specifically for that. I think the conference was duped in 2019, wasn't it? They said it was going to be for the most egregious cases, but the reality was, once they got their powers, even under Jenny Formby, actually, it was completely abused, and people were being refused the rights of natural justice which they're entitled to. So yeah, I absolutely agree on that. I think I'll hand over to Esther on that. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll respond to the other points then. First of all, with regard to the unions, there was a conference a couple of weeks ago called Stand Up for Labour Party Democracy, where a number of unions were represented, including the Bakers Union and the FBU. And they were speaking particularly in the context of the officer suspension. So we know that the unions are on the radar of what's happening now. The other thing that we know is that Unite has already withdrawn funding from the Labour Party, that previously amounted to around £2 million per annum, which leaves a £2 million hole in the Labour Party finances. So I think there is work to do with unions. I think unions are seeing that the Labour Party isn't the party they thought they'd signed up to. And that work needs to continue. Drawing on Kevin's point about the draconian measures being used, and that it's simply not right about these inroads into Labour Party democracy, you might be interested to know that this week, and bear in mind that even though I'm suspended, I'm still getting all the instructions and emails from the General Secretary and from the regional office and everyone else. There was an instruction about new data guidelines, and in fact the new guidelines state that officers are not allowed to use their access to personal data in order to produce emails to send to members that include any personal opinions. which presumably includes political opinions. And so I think we're potentially looking at another wave of suspensions that relate to the reporting of officers sending out communications to members that have opinions in. So I don't think we've seen the end of this yet. So there's hope in terms of the unions, I think, but I think the actions of the party in terms of stifling free speech are ongoing and indeed getting even more draconian.
Thank you, Esther. Yeah, and I mean, just on the point of Christine's point about being the opposition, I think that will be something again that we will discuss at the conference on Saturday, but it seems like a very sensible suggestion from my point of view. Okay, so now we'll go to Anita Bennett. Could you unmute yourself, Anita?
Hello, I'm Anita Bennett. I'm from Bristol West CLP and a colleague and a comrade of Esther's. And you may all have or not have heard about the 550 members so-called AGM last week. 550 members. I ran for disability officer. I was the only independent. The left wouldn't have me. The Starmer people wouldn't have me. And so I ran as an independent. Anyway, 550 people, 100 votes unaccounted for, 6.5 hour long meeting. I wasn't allowed to give a speech, wasn't allowed to publish anything in the chat show, total and utter sham. But that's the biggest Labour Party. So I think that's the first, line of attack against party democracy. I had a couple of questions based on I have been researching legal help. First of all, I finally got through to Unite. And when I finally got the solicitor from Thompson's, they said they can't represent me for disability discrimination because, I mean, they changed the whole format. It was a whole different IT. There was no way. All kinds of people couldn't get in. Even the MP didn't get her vote until like 10:30 or something. But Unite said that they can't represent me because they support the Labour Party. So that's kind of a bit of a dead end. I'd be very happy for any advice on that. Number two, any other, if anyone has any ideas of other law firms who might take it up on I think disability discrimination on the basis of ageism, disability, sex, and just a general shit show, because they only got, so the Thangham actively campaigned, and she's not supposed to be doing that, for her slate. She sent out emails and everything. And there hasn't been any publication of this except in the local rag, and nothing really in the Guardian. But I'd be really grateful for any thoughts or any suggestions on, I left a message for bindments, but they haven't got back. Any suggestions, really, really well appreciated, because I'm quite prepared to take this through, and I have done litigation in the past on various things successfully.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I think Terry Deans, you've got a contribution to make. Unmute yourself, Terry, and say.
Yeah, you've cut me out a little bit because I wasn't expecting to be called in, so I don't know how my message got across.
It got through chats.
Got through somewhere, yeah. So look, I just want to say thank you to all of you, Norman, Esther, and Neil, for what you've done today and the effort you've put in. It's been a good presentation. I think a lot of people, it's very informative about the awful things that have been happening. I wanted to focus a bit more on what we can do. I'm in Plymouth Moorview CLP. I joined the Labour Party 5.5 years ago when Corbyn became the leader, and I'd never even voted in my life before, never been involved in a political party in my life. Ex-Royal Navy, brought up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, so I know a little bit about division and conflict and stuff like that, and tribalism and propaganda and pitting people against each other and all that kind of stuff, the kind of thing which is going on now in the Labour Party, and the tactic which is being used, and this is where I'm coming to what we can do next. I think one thing that we overlook, and there's lots of people here, maybe they're still in the party, maybe they've left, okay, but I think that what happens is the Labour Party, to me, use an old imperialist type tactic, which is to undermine you, to break your confidence, to break your spirit, to disgust you, to outrage you. They don't want to be going around writing letters and emails to people. That they will do if they have to, but they'd be more happy, as Angela Rayner referred to when she put her thousands of members. That kind of stuff is designed for you to read and go, sod this, I'm off, if they're going to be like that. It saves them a job. My suggestion to people, amongst many other ones, I could be here for half an hour actually, but I won't, would be, we were given a great opportunity by Jeremy Corbyn. I never thought I'd ever see this in my lifetime. It made me join the Labour Party. Hundreds of thousands of other people did. I think that the best honour we can give to Corbyn is to stay and fight in the party, or if you're outside the party, you know, do it in your communities or join a union and stuff like that. But if you're inside the party and you're concerned about being expelled or suspended, tactics. These people are going through our Facebook pages. They've got little sort of local witch hunters, little sniffer dogs, as I call them, and they go through your Facebook posts and they report back to the region or back to their commandant and whatever organization, whatever the structure is, and it eventually you get suspended. Sometimes, as
Could
Neil
you wind
referred
up, Terry?
within 15 minutes of a meeting. So the tactics, you don't have to flaunt yourself in public. You don't have to respond to every baiting that's on Facebook by a right-wing troller. Okay, don't make the job easier. Use different tactics.
Okay.
Using different I'm just about to wind up, Norman. Using different tactics are not the same as selling out on your principles. I hear that a lot. I hear a lot of people saying, well, I've got to tell them what I think. Well, why? You know, keep it to your, talk to your comrades. Don't engage with them. Keep your spirits up, keep your mentality up. Don't let them undermine you, and stick to your friends and your comrades who believe in what you believe in. And good luck to you all, and keep fighting, guys. I'm here to the death.
Okay, thanks very much, Terry. I've got one a point that's I've got a point that's coming on chat from Mike Howard. For those comrades calling for legal action as one avenue, this Wednesday, the Jewish Voice for Labour group backed Labour activists for justice. The Labour activists for justice, who are backed by the JVL, have their initial High Court hearing against the whole disciplinary system with leading solicitors and barristers. If you go to the JVL's Facebook or website, you can support the action if you wish to do that. I'm going to go to Stan Keeble now. Stan, you can unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, okay, I'm unmuted. Yeah, a few things to say. Because I was expelled under not 2148, but not 28, but Rule 214 in October 2017. Now that's the same time as Moshe Makova was expelled, only he was reinstated at the end of the month because of a campaign. But that's the one that says anybody who belongs to an organisation which is not a unit of the party and is not affiliated to the party cannot be a Labour Party member, is ineligible. And that, of course, would apply to this organisation. It would apply to the Republican Labour. It would apply to LRC, Labour Representation Committee, and Campaign for Labour Party Democracy. None of these are affiliates of the party or units of the party. So that rules out. And it was one of the characters that was on the Panorama show against Labour by John Ware. You know, it's one of those characters who wrote me the letter from the Governance and Legal Unit. But then I was sacked by Hammersmith and Fulham Labour Council because of I spoke against Zionism in a demonstration, in the Enough is Enough demonstration. So I'm waiting now. I'm not yet there, but the council appealed against my reinstatement order, and I'm waiting for the Employment Appeals Tribunal to give their judgment. We've had the hearing, so I'm in limbo. Anyway, that's that. Somebody mentioned suicide. There was, of course, the Welsh Assembly member who committed suicide because he was under suspicion, because he was suspended and accused and, you know, not dealt with nicely. And of course, that is what happens to lots of people that the suicide is an extreme case, but it's lots of stress. I think my opinion is that the legal route is the wrong route to take. Actually, you have to do it in terms of defending yourself, but when it comes to going to take the Labour Party to court, the best answer actually is democracy, isn't it? It's to win over the mass of the rank and file members, and going to the court. You know, I think we'll find they'll bite us the wrong way in the end. At the moment, it's extraordinary that the court is a bit better than the Labour Party when it comes to justice and natural justice and that. Yes, but it's a short-term solution that will pay us back badly, I think.
Can you wind up, please, Stan?
Yeah, two other quick points. I want to say that keeping people together is a good idea, but it needs an aim. You know, we need to be together for an aim, and the aim should be socialism. And on democracy, we want to democratise society. We need to democratise the Labour Party so it can do that, and we need to be thoroughly democratic in our own working. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Yes, democratising the Labour Party, I think, is an essential core aim of this group, and I hope we'll be able to do that. I'll call on Becky to speak now. Thank you, Becky.
You're on mute, Becky.
Yeah, you need to unmute.
Right, I'll start again. Thank you, Norman. I just want to raise a couple of points, really, in the idea of what can we do. Firstly, I'm unclear about this, but I've seen on Twitter CLPs that are currently officerless, disbanded, won't be able to participate in a conference which might endorse David Evans as the General Secretary. And this seems to me a pretty big battle, disenfranchising entire CLPs from having a say in whether that man should be General Secretary. And I don't know if people have got comments on that. And the second thing I wanted to say, which was something that struck me, both about Neil's presentation and about Esther's presentation, we know that Professor David Miller is coming under a massive attack at Bristol University, and Zionist activists are seeking to have him sacked. As simple as that. And I noticed in Esther's presentation that the Southwest region has got the most officers suspended. I noticed that on the attack on Professor Miller, that Thanam Debonair was very upfront. And I think one of the things we can do is, instead of being tunnel vision about the Labour Party, recognise, as Neil put in his presentation, who are the actors, who are they trying to silence, and it's wider than the Labour Party, and we need to find a way of coping with what we have to cope with in the Labour Party, but also understanding that it's a wider thing. So I don't know if people want to comment on that.
Yeah. Norman, you're on mute.
Yeah, I know. I need to practice with my finger thumping my keyboard harder. Yes, thanks very much for that, Becky. It's a very interesting question. We'll wind the meeting up before 9 o'clock. So I'll go to the Peter Spillane, I think it is. Oh, yeah, Peter Spillane, and then we'll. Hello.
Do we want to feedback on any of those?
And then we'll feedback once we've taken the last question,
okay.
Peter. Then we'll come back to you, to Esther, and to Neil, and then we'll wind the meeting up.
Mine's a very simple and very straightforward one. I mean, what do colleagues feel you should do when you feel that your branch and constituency party should pass motions in support of suspended colleagues, but any motions that are put forward never get that far because they're ruled out of order.
Yeah.
So what do you do?
All right. Well, thanks very much for that, Peter. I think we'll now come back to Esther and to Neil for your answers to the questions. And I'll remind you again that really all these things that we're talking about now will be absolutely the bread and milk of the meeting, the conference, the founding conference that we're going to have next Saturday. But yes, over to you, Esther.
Should I go first then?
Or Neil, who's
No,
prepared?
Esther.
Yes,
Okay.
I go first. So Anita, I mentioned the recent data guidance, and I posted a link to it in the chat, and you talked about Thangam using her influence regarding the EC elections. I think you'll find that the latest data guidance states that that is not a legitimate use of the data. Specifically, it says that MPs have access to member data to report back on and engage with members on their work. So it is not legitimate for them to use member data to influence the results of EC elections. And that might be something you want to take up. And Stan referred to the legal route, stating the best answer was democracy. But I think the point that we've been making throughout the discussion this evening is that democracy is totally being removed at present. And so we need to be thinking about all the other actions at our disposal that Norman described as to how we can push back on this democratic deficit, which is unprecedented, as I've said. Becky stated that CLPs won't be able to take part in party democracy and to attend conference, but what we're seeing is that regional offices are taking over CLPs. They are stopping CLPs from meeting. Our CLP has not met since November, but the regional office will, as it did with Bristol West, be organising an AGM. It will be getting its actors in place, aided and abetted by the MPs, even though it's not a legitimate use of the data, and they will therefore be sending people to conference, including women's conference. So it is still a democratic deficit because it's managing the elections to EC posts, and I think that's partly what's behind this, particularly in the Southwest. That the Southwest Regional Office wants to see executive committees of CLPs with its own actors installed. I think there's little doubt about that. And finally, Peter, what do you do if motions are ruled out of order? Well, I think we have to go back to the list of what can we do, given the democratic deficit at the moment. What do you think, Neil?
Yes, I agree. I mean, what you can do. I mean, that's the list. If you can only pass resolutions, I think we're all agreed that we shouldn't be silent. We shouldn't. We should. And if we're going to stay in the Labour Party, we should be there to fight. If I can just go back to a couple of the other previous points, Anita, I think if you look in the chat, there's been quite a lot of stuff, helpful stuff there. We hear about the JVL Labour Actors for Justice have got their action coming up. Of course, we all support that and wish them the best of luck. Bindmans, I've also written to them as well. But I mean, I'm just myself getting back into this. Unfortunately, Louise Christian, who was a solicitor who dealt with all my case, she's now retired, and the firm that she last was involved with, Christian Khan, have now been passed on to Imran Khan and Partners. So I'm actually in discussion with them. They're actually a very good firm, and you might they specialise in a lot of stuff which is relevant to people being suspended and so on. Stan, yeah, we've had this discussion before, haven't we, about legal action and so on. I actually wrote a discussion document on this, which you can find on the Leon website. I think it's important. I think you're right. Most of the time, legal action fails, and you look at the case history. That's right. It's mostly a history of failure, but with the occasional successes. So I think we need to learn from that history about what works. So, for example, the natural justice argument is a very powerful one, and which is why I'm pushing that one. And yeah, so Becky, your point, absolutely, about the wider issues. I mean, which the IHRA bogus non-definition, which has been forced upon the Labour Party, and then now in wider society, particularly in universities. That's in some ways, we said that's now the frontline campaign, and we're seeing the effects at Oxford and Bristol. I'm very pleased to note that my uni and the UCU's have got a very solid position on that, actually. So there is a bit of a fight back there. So, for example, at UCL, the academic board there has come out against the IHRA and have called for the UCL to rescind that. So we need to be working. That's another union activity. Actually, we should be working with our own institutions to fight back on that one. Okay, I think I'll leave it there.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much, Neil. So I'm going to wind the meeting up now. Been a very interesting and very useful meeting, but I feel it's only just kind of part one of what it will be part two, which will be our conference, where we will be talking about the plan for change. If you haven't had a look at that, that's on the website. We're detailing the general aims of what we're trying to do in terms of democratizing the party and bringing a just system to it. I think the essential point is this, though, that the Labour Party still has membership of over 4,500 at the last count. I believe
450,000.
Right, it's 450,000. Yes, yes. But the basic point is that there are more of those people who are in sympathy with what we're doing than there are people against it. So in terms of democracy, in terms of very simple democracy, we have got a huge number of people who are on our side in this particular campaign. If we can harness their power, we can stop what's going on, the incredible unfairness and injustice that's going on, and we can turn the tide on it. But it's going to take, obviously, a big effort, and it's also obviously going to be, it's a trade union thing as well. The unions know very well that if we lose the battle, if the people who lose the battle now, the battle to save the left, then it's all going to be pushed back to the days of Tony Blair, and further back even than that, maybe, if that's what I mean. Starmer, in his famous speech, was basically talking about the importance of building, an alliance with business. Now, as though this was something new, but of course, anyone who remembers Tony Blair, that was one of his main planks, Labour and business must go hand in hand. And in local areas, such as South Thanet, we actually saw it happen, where dodgy developers and all sorts of kind of odd schemes were launched in order to, with the support of a Labour council, on the basis that this is what they were there to do, was to cooperate with business instead of helping ordinary people in their community. So we can win the fight, but it will take collective action, I believe, on the biggest scale that we can mount within our own party. So I'd like to thank very much Neil and Esther for their presentations, and all the people who contributed tonight. And I hope we will see you all at the conference next Saturday. You can basically find out all the details on our Facebook page or in the Labour in Exile website. But thanks very much for coming. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Norman. Thanks, Esther. Thanks, Neil.